Today, Ryan and I were members of Below. That is the Bureau of Exorcism, Liminality, and Occult Warfare. And that is the name of the game, or at least the series, but this one specifically is called The Asylum. And we are agents of this agency trying to basically use rituals, interestingly enough, to fend off the Monarch in this case.
Exorcisms. And, occult warfare. We're using the tools of that occult universe back against these evil things. And like David said, this one is taking us to the Asylum. Now, this game has one concept, might seem familiar, but you have the above and the below. And no, we're not talking about Ryan Lockett.
Yeah, it's a very different above and below.
It is a very different. There's a board set up here that is literally the same board mirrored, but you'll see the Asylum, which I'll be honest, it's not in great shape anyway. But then on the reverse side, you have the even worse below. So think like Silent Hill, Stranger Things, whatever. These are parallel worlds that would almost be stacked on top of each other. They're almost exactly identical layouts, although there's maybe some like different paths and different items you can interact with on different sides. But us and the monsters are going to be bouncing back and forth between these two different worlds in order to complete our rituals.
Yeah, and that bouncing back and forth is sometimes conscious and sometimes because you want to, because we have these rifts that are open and we can go through those. Now, we do want to manage those rifts as well. Like any good co-op, there's a lot of things to manage in this game. But there are going to be other times where you might shift over there when you don't necessarily want to, because every character is going to effectively move up their own little personal shift track and eventually just kind of phase over to the other area. And if that happens when you least suspect it, it might shift you over to the mirrored room. There might be a lot of enemies there.
Yeah, I'm going to start by kind of talking about that player board and talking. You can see it here in front of me. Now, David and I are playing two very different characters. I'm the Blade. He's the Conductor. Our characters come with different components. I have this whole like blade, literal like blade.
It hungers for souls.
Yeah, it hungers. As I fight things, this track goes up, and anytime I can kind of cash it in to trigger all those, all of the abilities. And then over on the other side, we've got our potential, stamina, movement, attack, and health. We've got the same set of attributes and resources, but they are different.
Yeah.
For both of us, we're each better at different things. And then that shift track that David was talking about in the upper corner, as we draw these shimmer cards, which we'll have to go through on our turn, it's going to move this track. And it's kind of a tense moment because as it starts to kind of move down, you know that you could just be one or two cards away from a shift. And when you shift, you literally like could be moving from one side of the board to the exact opposite. You could go from an okay situation to a very bad one when that shift happens. I kind of like the tension of that shift about to happen.
Yeah, and it is tension both ways because after you play a while, you might even try to start incorporating that because you're going to be doing one of those shimmer cards at the end of your turn. And oftentimes those will move that shift track, maybe one, maybe two, maybe as many as three, oftentimes or sometimes as few as zero. So if you're thinking like, okay, well, I'm going to move it, I'll have a shimmer card, so it'll likely move me over. And then you get the zero, it doesn't move you over. So there's quite a bit of unpredictability, but a lot of the game is also managed through a lot of card use. There is some dice, but I wouldn't classify this as a dice chucker because a lot of what you're trying to accomplish on the game doesn't involve rolling on the dice. When you are interacting or banishing or fighting the enemies, you will roll some dice, but you're going to want to even modify that with a lot of cards. But otherwise, a lot of the things in the game are done through cards. In fact, all of the enemies, the way they interact with you is just effectively a number of cards you're going to be reading off of to see what they do to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of these different cards, and these cards correspond to these different fiends. You've got the fiends, which we are using 3, the nurse, the skinwalker, and the needleclaw, which is what the scenario told us to use. And then we've got our monarch, which is this giant, freaky-looking miniature right here, who's like the ultimate evil. However, in this game, you don't have to fight and defeat the monarch. What you're really trying to do is manage everything that's happening on the board while also simultaneously completing your ritual. So we'll talk about the ritual in a minute, but let's talk about what you have to do to like mitigate the board. First of all, we talked about these rifts opening. These rifts will be popping up and they will basically create portals for these monsters to cross over to the other side and chase us down. If you can't place one of those, you lose the game. If any one of your characters dies, you lose the game. If this chapter deck runs out before you manage to complete your ritual and escape, you lose the game. So there's a lot of different things that you have to manage. You don't necessarily lose the game from having the guys on the board, but if you don't manage that, if you don't reduce their presence, they're just going to devour you. I mean, there's really
it makes
no other
a lot
way.
of the other things really difficult.
It does.
You even have your own health track now. You can go through that health track a few different times and suffer some consequences on a little deck of cards that goes sort of on the last spot. But if you go to the end of that, you're also out and lose the game.
Well, yeah, and you can take damage from a lot of different ways. This game takes huge advantage of something called opportunity attacks, which maybe you've heard of that term in other games. It means if you do something in a room that isn't necessarily fighting the enemies, you will take an opportunity attack. Now, this game does do these opportunity attacks in interesting ways. Each one of these fiends that you set out has a number of opportunity attack cards that are drawn, but these all come from the same attack deck. Each attack card has kind of two sides. There's a part at the top that's the opportunity attack, and then the part at the bottom that happens if you fight with those monsters. You do want to fight them, you want to fight and defeat them, but you might also end up in a situation where you're trapped in a room with them. At the end of your turn, the monsters in that room are going to attack you. So that can be tough too. So you really want to mitigate the monsters by fighting them or by using an effect called push that lets you kind of move the monsters around, which your guy was way better at.
Yes,
mine.
for sure. The conductor is quite a bit less about fighting and combat, which I think the blade
is all
obviously
about combat.
And I'm about manipulating things. The conductor actually has these little spirit cats. They're sort of like spectral cats that he can move around. I started with one on the board. I think there's obviously a way I can get a second one out on the board, but I can, as a free action, spending some potential, move the cats around and then use the cats in those spaces to push some of the enemies out of the room. Now, there are some limitations to that. I can't push a ton of big enemies. There are some strict limitations, but I can do that to sort of move things around. Now, why do we want to move things around? It's not just about like, get these enemies out of the way so I don't have to deal with them. Sometimes this ritual, which we have these ritual cards that are sort of attached and associated with the main ritual wheels, but these rituals are going to want a number of different things. Sometimes it might even say, you want this enemy in this type of room, or you want this type of enemy in a room with a book. We've got these ritual components that we're going to be sort of scattering around the board. All of that really ties to what we're trying to get done.
Yeah, like that's the real puzzle of the game, is that you're going to build this stack of ritual cards, and they start off kind of easy, and then they get a little bit harder as you go down them. Each one of these is going to have a main objective that you want to complete. And again, we said this is cooperative. So you really need to look at this and say, how are we going to tackle this in our turn? You only get a certain number of rounds. There's a certain number of event cards. And like I said, if you run out, you lose. So you need to look at this. Everyone gives you a basic kind of ritual that you have to complete, and then some bonus optional steps. And these can be really hard. I mean, to try to get like this one, for example, had 3 optional steps and 1 main. If we completed all of it, we would have gotten 4 seals, which is huge. That's one of the main ways to get seals. Now, you can get some seals by coming over here and interacting with these cards, but once you do and you flip them, you don't get seals from them anymore. This is the one reliable way, and we'll talk about what seals do. But some of these puzzles, they're really hard. They'll want you to be in specific places or have those ritual components that David mentioned in different spaces, or in some instances, be in mirroring rooms, which means you've got players on both sides in the same rooms, and like they're hard.
Yeah, really, it's a level of coordination.
Yeah.
A lot of this ritual cards, the first thing is to do a thing. So get into a room, spend a stamina to trigger this sort of,
Or discard a thing, or spend a resource.
The optional steps, at least the ones we've seen thus far, are about having a certain sort of board state also in place. So you're going to take a look at this card and go, okay, let's set up some of these optional situations and then trigger this so that we can actually do it and have as many of these seals as possible. But sometimes you might put a lot of these in place, and then by the time you get around to doing the top part, some of those things may have changed for you, because there's a lot of things in the game that will obviously affect that. Enemies moving, all sorts of things from event cards, changing the board state as well. So trying to coordinate all these is very important, but the rule book that we have even says, don't spend too much time trying to get all of them done. But at the same time, it says, don't just do the one part.
Right. Try to do some of the bonuses, but don't lose the game because you were so focused on completing all the optionals that you never completed the main one. Because there is a whole timing aspect to completing these rituals. And this whole concept I've been talking about, we've been mentioning seals. These little cubes are like seals, and they go on this board here. And this is a puzzle in and of itself, because this wheel is going to be spinning and moving. Both the outer wheel and the inner wheel can move at different states of the game, and it's going to cause different pathways to appear. Now, the goal is to get to some of these colored spots where you're going to be dropping off your rituals, your candles, your skulls, or your books, and then ultimately finding a path to put the final cube in the center, which is what's going to complete the ritual. But every time you complete a ritual, you're going to get a certain number of these seals. And again, you have to follow this path. So as these wheels turn, some paths are going to be better than others. Some paths will let you get into that middle circle, or even let you finally get into the very, very middle, but those paths might not be there every turn. So you're going to need to find ways to maybe mitigate that by going to some of these different encounter cards, or by coming over here to what's called the life force gathering in the summoning room, which can move that wheel. But it's a brain burning puzzle, because you're worried about that. You're worried about completing all these, and you're still worried about like not succumbing to any of the in-game conditions. All of that's happening at the same time.
Yeah, you don't have complete control over that wheel. Like Ryan said, there are some places on the board. We actually uncovered this spot where you could also, you have to remove this card from the game, but it allowed you to move either the inner or the outer wheel. But the event cards themselves are also going to move that wheel an unknown amount.
Sure.
You know, you're going to have these event cards which are somewhat random for this scenario, and you flip one over, it might not move one at all. It might move it two. And this is usually, at least the ones we've seen, only the outer wheel.
Yeah, the outer wheel. Yep. I think it's always the outer wheel.
So there's really no telling exactly how it's going to happen. You kind of got to make the most of it. But like Ryan said, what you're trying to do here is not only get that cube into the center using all those routes, but hit all of these spots so that you have at least a candle, a skull, a book, and then in this case, one that's any one of those three, by hitting those spots around the entire network.
Yeah, and the other cool thing about completing these rituals is all of these spots that you see have little icons, and these all give you abilities. So every time you place a seal, you're choosing, okay, I want to go this way on the path because that's going to lead us towards our next ritual component, but also maybe I want to upgrade my potential, or I want to upgrade my movement, or I want to draw some item cards. Also, this is the way that you're going to get new ability cards from your ability deck, which is, again, character specific, that are going to give you more actions that you can do on your turn, or they can actually be upgraded to become more powerful versions of themselves. You're really relying on those ability cards. You're really relying on your items, and you're really relying on these encounter cards that are out here to actually get stuff done on your turn.
Yeah, it was interesting. In this last game that we played, Ryan and I, we did hit that ability trigger. He took a new ability, so he has another ability. I chose to upgrade my cats, the Eerie Hiss. And the Eerie Hiss has a couple upgrade spots. One, you can place so that when those cats move into a room, they can move farther. The one I chose is they only still move 2, but when they're in that room, they can push more. So instead of just pushing 2, they could push 4. And when you push 4, it's associated with these fiends. All the fiends have things where there's a value of damage you have to do to kill them, or in the case of the Needle Claw, just to shift them, or a value that it's required to push them. So with 4, I could push a Needle Claw, but at its base level, I could never push a Needle Claw with my cats.
Yeah.
I guess makes some sense.
It does make some sense. And it's interesting that in our scenario, the Needle Claws can never be killed. If they are defeated, they just shift over to the other world, and they have to claw their way back.
Yeah.
But they will come back. These monsters, too, these fiends, they will get more powerful. As we start to get more and more rifts on the board, they'll actually flip over to even like worse versions of themselves. So that's going to be escalating. The sheer number of monsters on the board is going to be escalating, because every one of these event cards is going to move and add more monsters. And as well, the Monarch itself is going to get more challenging as you move through the chapters. It gets like a special always move, and then a move if you're in chapter 2, and then a move if you're in chapter 3. They get worse and worse, and the rituals get harder. So even if you're playing a game where you're like, okay, this all seems pretty doable at the beginning, by the time you get halfway through the game, it becomes really, really incredibly difficult to puzzle out, which I think a good cooperative needs to be a little difficult to solve, right?
Sure.
Like, you don't want to just easily win your first game.
Yeah, for sure. In our experience with it, like Ryan said, that first round, I think, at least I was thinking, okay, this is...
Yeah.
But even starting in the second round, things started getting out of hand. As soon as you started adding monsters, we have more monsters on the board than we have off the board right now in terms of the figures that are available. And it should be noted too, all of the figures, all of the components, all of the ritual components in particular are limited. So once you've used those, you've used those. It doesn't say to just use a replacement or anything like that, and which can be tricky in a game like this where you're trying to get these ritual components in certain places and manage the monsters.
Yeah, so now that we've kind of talked about all of that, we'll talk just a little bit about what you do on your turn, because it is basically an action selection system. You've got a certain number of actions and you've got 3 actions to spend. And they have this little slider that's going to kind of show you, which action you're on. You'll notice that there's a lock on the 4th action. We can unlock a 4th action slot, which is really good, but it's going to be done in different ways. I have to get my stamina all the way to level 6 to unlock mine. You just have to get your movement to level 3, which you'll probably get your 4th action way before I will in any given game.
Right, which is really interesting and thematic to the characters. And it should be noted, too, if you're a fan of Awaken Realms and you've played games like Stalker, while this is an entirely different system from a whole new designer, I do think they've probably incorporated some of the things that they've learned from some of their other games. I think this is a nice way, really nice way, similar to Stalker, to track the number of actions you've taken in your turn. The other thing, which is quite similar to Stalker, is there's this lead character token or lead agent token. You have this, and at any time as a free action, you can flip this over to effectively give it to someone else to do their actions instead if they have action points left, and then it eventually come back to you, which is a nice way to kind of like, oh, we're in a situation where it'd be better if you go first than I do so we can set something up. That's going to be very important in this game. Now, once you do that, it doesn't flip over to the end of the round, so you can't
just keep bouncing around.
You can't just keep bouncing it around.
And also,
every time, cool technique.
Every time you do, you have to draw and resolve a shimmer card too, which can be pretty bad, especially if that's the shimmer card that moves you onto your shift and forces you to move and can kind of wreck your plans. Yeah, you can even do that. Like I could spend 2 actions, pass this to David, and when he gets back to me, do my other 2 actions. That's the only really way to like set up a combo. Otherwise, you're doing all of your actions at once. You do all of your actions, which are the things you'd expect that we've talked about: the moving, the fighting, the interacting with these cards. You can lay down these components in your room, which you'll need for the rituals. And then each ritual is going to show you whether it could be a free action or it could be an action that actually requires you to use one of your actions to do. And they've kind of differentiated that. You'll see blue icons, red icons, and white icons that represent like actual actions, free actions, reactions, which is kind of smart that they did that.
Yes.
Because by the time you're done, you're going to have actions all over. You're going to have actions on some of your items, actions on your abilities. So it's helpful to know which is actually using up my actual, like one of my 4 actions, or which one am I just doing kind of as I do other things. After you're done with that, that's when you have to draw the shimmer card and apply its effects. And then after everyone is done with their turns, that's when you draw the event card, which most of the time is going to then activate that Monarch. So you can see that a lot, like David said earlier, a lot changes in between rounds because of all those cards you're drawing.
Yeah, a lot will change at the very end of the round with that event card for sure, because it's going to move enemies around. They're going to attack if they're in rooms. The attacks are resolved in an interesting way. We've touched on that. You really, like even in this room here with all these creatures, you're pulling one fiend attack, no matter how many fiends are in there. And then it'll kind of, it's an interesting system because it might, some of those cards might actually be affected by the fiends that are in that room. Like it'll say the strongest fiend, or it might move some fiends. It does
draw
all sorts
more
of
cards equal to the number of fiends in your room, which happened to me. And I ended up drawing like 5 cards, which is rough.
It's kind of a unique system that kind of almost feels like, while those cards aren't like narrative in the traditional sense, they do tell a story of what's happening that feels unique in a situation.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas if you're in another room later in the game with the same sort of situation, it could unfold in a very, very different way.
Right. I mean, and this game itself is very modular. Like we're playing what they call the demo scenario, which is just 2 players with this particular setup. But there's a bunch of these different tiles that you can use to kind of build the asylum. I would imagine there's going to be different monarchs, because they reference this monarch's component specifically. And then they even reference that there's some different layouts for the ring as well. So you're going to be having different combinations every time you play, which means you're not going to be able to just, okay, here's what we did last game, let's do it again. Because things are changing, and this puzzle here is going to be very different every time you play. And kind of the order that which you're placing these cubes is going to determine what your options are for the next rituals you complete. So you really have to think ahead, but you also have to always be dealing with the immediate threats that are in front of you too.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like anything that you might have experienced playing something like Nemesis or a lot of other, the Awaken Realms in particular, cooperative games. And one last thing I wanted to point out, or at least emphasize, we talked earlier about this ritual. This ritual, these dials aren't just about completing the game. We mentioned that each of those spots have these bonuses, and I wanted to emphasize once again how important those bonuses are, because they're attached to a lot of the different cards that let you navigate and mitigate even some of your dice rolls or add to them. One of them is spells, and when you get spells, you're going to draw 3 spell cards, and I think this is unique because even if it's my turn and I do this, I'm going to draw 3, and then as a group, we're going to select one of those 3 to have as kind of a spell that we have at our disposal. Now, when you use them, they're one and done, but they're out there for anyone at the table to use, and they can be quite powerful. This one says simply, as a free action with no cost of any kind, choose a room and deal 6 damage there.
Yeah,
and then it says deal 5 damage to any room that has yellow skulls. So later in the game, you might wait and go, okay, we got some yellow skulls out. Let's use this now and clear out some of these rooms to get some of the enemies off the board. But these spells can be very powerful. And then the items, which can come in a different way. You can get them from the ritual. You can actually just uncover items. Those are going to be the things Ryan's collected quite a few of that, again,
3 of them.
allow you to enhance a lot of the things that you're doing. And I think winning this game revolves very much about that. And I think it's cool that they've tied it to the kind of core thing that you're trying to do. So you're naturally getting some of those things by getting through these rituals. And the more of those optional ones you do, the more cubes you're going to be able to place there to get those things.
Yeah, and doing some of those optional ones early when they're easier is going to work out a lot better.
Yes.
Like this one gives us 3 options, but they're all hard. And even the rituals themselves, like we're only on the 2nd level of ritual here.
They get
It goes
harder.
all the way to like a greater ritual, these red rituals, which are very difficult to complete. And you don't get to look ahead at these. You choose a certain number of each one and place them. So you can't say, okay, well, we're going to pick a bunch that all want blue books. And you have no idea what's going to happen with the next one. That means like all the work that you've done preparing for this, you finish it, you take a big breath, then you flip over the next one, and then back to starting over how to figure that one out again.
Yeah, so that is Below the Asylum. This is the next one from Awaken Realms. And of course, we didn't say this. This is a prototype, but even still, the miniatures with all their games
all the components are phenomenal.
amazing, and they are in this prototype as well. But if you have any questions, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer everything we possibly can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.